After many centuries, the Catholic Church has fully restored an ordained ministry which was established by our Lord Himself, the diaconate. There are 3 holy orders within the Church: bishop, priest, and deacon. For centuries, however, the diaconate, or ministry of deacon, was looked on as little more than a stepping stone to the priesthood. The bishops of the Second Vatican Council, however, wanted to see this ministry fully restored in the life of the Church. Now the diaconate is once again an active and permanent ministry of service and of worship. How this happy development came about and its importance in the life of the Church today is the topic of this presentation of the St. Charles Forum.
The Eternal Word Television Network presents the St. Charles Forum from St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
We are very pleased to have with us today full representation of the threefold ministry of the Church: a bishop, a priest, and a deacon. First of all, we welcome Bishop Dale Melczek, Chairman of the Bishops' Committee on the Permanent Diaconate of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. Welcome, Bishop.
Thank you very much.
Also, Father Andrew Golias, who is the Administrator of the Office of the Permanent Diaconate for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Welcome,
John.
Father. And Deacon Jim Schweitzer of the Office of the Permanent Diaconate of the Archdiocese of New Orleans. And Jim is the director of that office.
Thanks
Jim,
so
so happy to have you with
Sure.
us. Well, you all know that when your average Catholic layman hears of the ordained ministry, that he usually thinks of the priesthood, first of all. Then he may think of the bishop, but seldom does he ever think of the deacon. Bishop Melczek, where did this ministry of the deacon come from?
The deacon is very much in evidence in the early apostolic communities. We find in the Acts of the Apostles selecting deacons. In fact, the very first martyr in the Church was a deacon. In the first 4 centuries particularly, we find much evidence of the deacon very active in the church communities.
If I could ask a question about the apostolic period, why did the apostles choose out men as deacons?
The apostles found that the needs for distributing food and assistance to the widows and the orphans, the needy, was occupying much of their time. They knew they were called to spend more time in prayer and in preaching the good news. And so they laid hands upon deacons to assist them in their ministry.
So right at the very beginning then of the life of the Church, we had this ministry of deacons.
At the very beginning.
Father, were there many men called to this ministry and at the time of the apostles?
I think the original number was 7, and the only job description were that they were deeply spiritual and prudent individuals who would devote themselves to a ministry of service.
So it's very specific then in the Acts of the Apostles that a specified number of men were even chosen for this ministry. Does it have their names at all?
It does. Don't test my memory.
I won't. That's how I asked.
But Stephen certainly was the first mentioned, and even one was a convert that they laid hands on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now, if there was a patron saint of the deacons, it might be Stephen.
St. Stephen or St. Lawrence, probably. Those two that are held up as guys that the deacons would emulate.
Now,
in the Restoration.
why is it that St. Stephen is so well known as a deacon in this apostolic period?
Being the first martyr, of course, and then his great devotion to the Lord, to achieve martyrdom, and so I think that's carried through even today. In talking with many deacons, that's the symbol in which we minister. Say, if Stephen were here, how would he do this? Or Lawrence.
Well, that's nice. So you look to Stephen.
Back.
So
sure.
He's still with you.
Those
very,
are
very
our
much with you.
heroes. Those are the people that we hold up. In our diocese, we gather on the Feast of St. Stephen.
Oh, well,
and that's nice. The night that we recommit ourselves to the service to the diocese.
Oh, wonderful.
And hold up that image of his image to us as a role model for how we conduct our own ministry and our own lives.
A willingness even to lay down your life for our Lord and for His church and in service to the poor.
Right.
It's beautiful. Bishop Melczek, I had pulled you back. You were starting to move into the first 4 centuries of the church. I pulled us back to the apostolic period.
Sure.
But after that period, we see this ministry continuing?
We do, and we see many evidences of deacons functioning in the church. It's certainly found in the Didache, in the writings of Pope Clement to the Corinthians.
What is the Didache?
The Didache is one of the earliest known documents of the church, which describes the way the church functioned at that time. And so we treasure that as giving us an example of how the church functioned in
this Didache, which is very, very old, almost about the time of the Bible, right?
About the year 90 to 100. Yes.
And it mentions deacons.
Yes, it does. Yes, and we find evidence of the deacons, for example, in the apostolic traditions of Hippolytus, doing the very kinds of things that deacons do today in the restored diaconate. Hippolytus described the ordination rite for deacons at that time, and he describes them distributing the Eucharist, preparing the altar with the gifts, baptizing, and doing the very ministries deacons do today.
So it truly is a restoration.
It is a restoration.
Of an ancient ministry.
Absolutely.
Well, Father, why did it have to be restored? What happened to it?
Well, I think in the time of the rise of monasticism, and certainly into the time of St. Thomas Aquinas, the role of the deacon became more and more associated with the liturgical ministry and became almost understood completely as a step to the priesthood, so that what we commonly call perhaps a transitional deacon in the church today, that became the understanding that it was a step to priesthood, and the permanency of the ministry was something that was lost.
Now, there never was a time in the history of the church when there weren't deacons, right? I mean, even though they weren't prominent, didn't have a prominent role to play.
If we say that the hierarchy is a sacrament composed of bishop, priest, and deacon, and that's a hallmark of what it means to be Roman Catholic, then I think the answer is clear that the hierarchy was intact from its origins.
Now, you're celebrating the 25th anniversary of your own ordination. You went through a year, didn't you, as a transitional deacon, or what would it have been when you were ordained?
Well, in Rome it was a little bit faster. It was about half year.
Half a year, 6 months.
We were ordained to the diaconate in May, and then ordained to the priesthood in December. But normally in seminary formation, the last year of seminary studies is the diaconate, where a young man who's a candidate for the priesthood would also have an opportunity to exercise his ministry of preaching, of sacrament, and of charity.
But in the past, I mean, so many of our Catholic viewers wouldn't have seen a deacon because, in a sense, they were sort of hidden in the seminary, right? I mean, it was. What about your case, Bishop?
In my days as a deacon, we were a deacon for about 9 months, but in those days we were not allowed to go out and function except liturgically, and then just a few times in the course of the year. So certainly at that time, most Catholics would not have been familiar with the deacon, except to see the celebrant, the deacon, and the subdeacon
in the old solemn high mass.
Exactly.
Yes. And let's see, Father, when you were ordained, was this about the time that the diaconate was being restored as a permanent ministry?
I was ordained in 1970, so it was. We were pretty well close, because I believe the document of restoration, I think, was in 72.
In 1967.
67 and then 72.
And then 72,
Yeah.
Yes. The American bishops asked for the restoration in 1968. So it would have been about the time of your ordination. Yes.
Well, Jim, the bishop said the American bishops asked for its restoration about 1968.
It was a very quick turnaround, too. I was looking.
But where did the American bishops come up with this idea? Did it originate with them? Were they the ones that came up with the idea of restoring the diaconate?
Well, the documents of the council, the dogmatic constitution of the church, had restored the diaconate. That was the first chance to legitimately recognize the restoration.
Oh, so this was an issue at the council itself.
The council.
Yes,
exactly.
It was. But interestingly, we could go back to the Council of Trent.
Right.
And in their 27th session, they called for the restoration of the three sacred orders.
Oh, did they really?
It didn't happen, however, as we know. So in the years prior to the Second Vatican Council, there was again the effort to have the three orders restored.
Mm-hmm. Where did some of the agitation for this come from? I mean, were the theologians writing on this, the historical theologians trying to have this restored?
It came from a lot of discussions in Europe around the time of World War II, and some of the discussions of moving the church into the world more prominently, with the ordained presence there in the world. A lot of discussions we can trace back to some of the concentration camps where there was a lot of discussion. Then Father Carl.
Now, why would there have been discussions of this subject in
because
concentration camps?
some of the priests who were interred there had been forward thinkers. They had been really looking forward to even having priests go into the communities and work with among the people.
I mean, there was a worker priest movement
the whole worker priest movement, and so that discussion, one thing led to another, and the real discussion began there, and then carried to some of the German bishops picked it up, and even Pius XII had some input into some comments about the restoration. So the undercurrent there began back in the 40s to begin the undercurrent.
So it was clearly an agenda item then going into the council. Were there any controversies surrounding proposals for its restoration?
Well, there was a lot of discussion on it, but it was unanimously approved. I was looking at a document just recently that the first vote that was cast was like a 3-to-1 margin. The bishops approved the concept, and then it was then clarified a bit, and then the wording of the dogmatic constitution then formulated the restoration. And then Pope Paul VI took that and actually in his letter gave us the instruction for the restoration.
Mm-hmm. So there was this document of the Second Vatican Council known as the Dogmatic Constitution of the Church, or Lumen Gentium.
Lumen Gentium.
Right? Okay, and that called for it. And then it was Paul VI, Your Excellency, who actually...
Yes, but if I could back up for a moment to that document, it's interesting that the diaconate is mentioned in paragraph 29, which is a part of the chapter on the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the Council Fathers really wanted to establish that this is one of the sacred orders, and that deacons are not to be classified with the lay people, because through the imposition of hands and the words of ordination, they become members of sacred orders. But to pick up on your question, then it was Paul VI who really gave us the impetus to restore the diaconate in the years shortly after the council. His first document was in 1967. And as I mentioned earlier, the American bishops then in 68 asked that the diaconate be restored in our country. The way the Pope put it, that individual conferences of bishops would have to request it. Once the Holy See gave approval to a request by a conference, then it was up to an individual diocesan bishop to request it for his own diocese.
I see. Okay, it's a very, very interesting brief overview of the history of the diaconate. We'll explore this question further when we return.
The St. Charles Forum will return in a moment.
Welcome back to the St. Charles Forum as we discuss the restoration of the ministry of the diaconate in the Catholic Church. Father, I'd be interested in the relationship of the diaconate to the other ministries. I mean, we speak of bishop, priest, and deacon. Are there three sacraments?
I think there's a sacrament of holy orders that has three ranks: the bishop, the priest, and the deacon, all ordained by the imposition of hands and a prayer of consecration said by the bishop who ordains.
And you use the word hierarchy and the word rank. So hierarchy suggests higher and lower. How do they relate to one another in that sense?
Well, I think they each image in a particular way some very important aspect of the ministry of Jesus, the ministry of teacher, the ministry of priest, and, as we've been saying, the deacon is the ministry of service, or the ministry of the servant.
Mm-hmm. And of the three ministries, can we say that that one more fully manifests the ministry and presence of Christ in the church
Well, I
than
think
another?
the council makes it clear in its teaching that the bishop is the understanding for the model of what ordained ministry is, because he has the fullness of the priesthood. He's the high priest in the church. Mm-hmm. So that the bishop ordains people to share in his ministry and to cooperate with him in the work of teaching, sanctifying, and shepherding the church.
Well, Bishop Melczek, then it seems appropriate to turn to you with my next question. How do you see the relationship of the deacon to you as a bishop?
First of all, I think it might be helpful to say that in terms of priesthood, the bishop has the fullness of priesthood, and the second grading, as it were, of priesthood is the ministerial priesthood, the clergy. The deacon is not given laying on of hands toward the priesthood, but the deacon has hands laid upon him for service, to assist the bishop and to assist the priest in their responsibilities to the people of God. So,
now, in what areas would he be of principal assistance to the bishop?
Well, he has a threefold ministry. He has
the deacon does himself.
The deacon does, mm-hmm. Yes. A ministry of word, a ministry of altar, and a ministry of service. And that's the aspect that we really like to emphasize today. Note that it is the bishop that ordains the deacon. The clergy, the priests rather, do not impose hands upon them. So the relationship of the deacon is primarily to the bishop.
Oh, rather than to the priest.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Now, the bishop may assign the deacon to assist priests in a variety of their own roles, whether it be in an institution or whether it be in a parish, and so on. And normally, under any circumstance, he has some opportunity to minister sacramentally at the altar, to preach, to have a ministry of the word, and especially a ministry of service.
Well, Jim, tell me, do you feel that you're at the bottom of the pile? I mean, if we're talking about hierarchy and the diaconate is the lowest in the hierarchy?
Well, not really, because of that relationship that we have with the bishop. And that is really something that we really cherish a great deal because of our close relationship there. And we don't see it as necessarily structured, but really complementary, that we would be complementing those areas of ministry that with the priest and with the bishop. And not competitive at all, but all kind of working together in a complementary sense.
And all part of God's plan.
Part of God's plan,
mm-hmm.
that was set up in the Acts of the Apostles to minister this, carry on this church.
Yeah. So as the apostles in the scriptures ordained these men as deacons to wait tables, so that they'd be free for prayer and preaching the gospel, you're doing the same for the bishops.
Actually, exactly, and we see that as the complementary ministry to the rest, and kind of it works in mosaic. You know?
And if I could interrupt, besides a function, and the deacon, as I said, has a number of functions, and we could talk about that. I think we should.
Yeah.
But sacramentally, the deacon is configured to Christ, the servant to the Father. And as such, he is a witness not only to the lay people of their role to imitate Jesus in his servanthood, but also a witness to the bishop.
Oh, very good.
And to the priest.
Mm-hmm.
That we are all called, as baptized Christians, to imitate Jesus, who got up from the table at the Last Supper, removed his tunic, washed the feet of his apostles, and said, as I have done, so must you do. So he has a very important role in the local church, in the diocese.
And so the deacon is to be Jesus out there washing the feet of the other Christians, of the poor in the world.
Exactly, and not only is he to do that, but he is to remind all of us
that we ought to be doing
that we also must be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Paul VI called it the animator animator of others, calling others to that to a like ministry.
The ministry of diaconate is the animator.
Right, it would be the
charity.
one that would animate others to move to the marginalized, to those that where the needs would be, and minister in the image of Christ. And if Christ were among us, that's always our model and image of where that it's sort of Jesus the servant model.
Well, if we're talking about images and models and symbols, we can't help but notice that we're talking about a threefold ministry, and there's another number 3 in our religion, and that is for the persons of the Trinity. Father, is there any significance
This is
with the
something
threefold
I like to
ministry
play
and
with a lot.
the Blessed Trinity?
I think, obviously, if you look at the bishop is the father of the Christian community. And if you look at the priest, generally speaking, he would image the Son in the ministry of his priesthood as the sacrificial ministry is put before. And I think I like to see the deacon as really an image of the Spirit, because you kind of know the Spirit by the works that the Spirit prompts. Mm-hmm. And the Spirit is among the community as a bond
Animates
of unity,
the whole community.
and as someone who's a link of reconciliation, and as Jim said, a mover and an animator. So I think we could maybe argue in terms of imaging the persons of the Trinity that there is a parallel that we could latch on to for that.
I think one of the beautiful things that has been developing in the church since the council is a much greater stress upon the Trinitarian character of God, and that we ought to be worshiping Him more as He is in terms of Trinity. So we see that in terms of this ministry then. I mean, the restoration of the ministry is actually helping to manifest this reality of God more fully to us.
Exactly. Grace pulls us into a relationship with the 3 persons of the Trinity and challenges us to live in a reconciled, as it were, relationship with one another.
Oh, there we see too, and it's one sacrament.
Exactly.
It's holy orders,
Yes.
but three ranks within the one ministry, the one sacrament. Yeah, beautiful. Well, then I suppose one of the things you're saying, and Jim, I'll throw this to you because you're the one sitting there in a coat and tie. Can we call you a lay deacon? As distinct from these men in the seminary who are going to go on and be priests, and these are transitional deacons? Is it right to call permanent deacon a lay deacon?
Well, that's a contradiction in terms, actually, of all we've just said here, because the deacon is in major orders and is a cleric. However, we do lead a lay lifestyle for the most part, and so we sometimes are identified with the laity. But officially, we are members of the hierarchy and our clergy, so that term lay deacon would be improper.
It's inappropriate then.
But the identity with the laity is always important for us, because that's where we live, and that forms that bridge that we can develop, and that contact for the church.
Yeah, we
in
were
dealing
talking
with those.
earlier about the relationship of the various ministries, and now we're talking about the deacon's relationship to the laity as well, right?
I think too, speaking of paradigms or models, not that all permanent deacons are married, but I think one of the images that the Holy Father uses to talk about the ordained minister is the minister is the spouse of the church, who is the bride. So I think the permanent deacon, in a very real sense, in his ministry of his sacrament of marriage, if he's married, and then in the sacrament of holy orders, presents a very enfleshed image of how Jesus loves the church.
And there's another aspect there too, with a permanent deacon, is his age. We can't ordain a permanent deacon until he's 35, as opposed to a transitional deacon. Mm-hmm. So also we have coming into that picture, into that mix, a maturity, an experience with life, of living among a lay lifestyle for a longer period of time, and so you have that identity as well.
So if he's 35, he's had to have spent some time out in the marketplace.
Exactly, or in the world in some fashion.
And I don't think we could stress what we're talking about here enough. The deacon is in sacred orders. He is not a lay person, but he is, as it were, a bridge to the lay people. He brings the church into the marketplace. In fact, we describe the deacon as the eyes and the ears, the heart and the soul, the lips of the bishop out amongst the marketplace, out amongst the people, particularly out amongst the neediest.
Well, what's the relationship between the diaconate in the Catholic Church and the diaconate in the Eastern Church? Now, I mean, I know that the Greek Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, and indeed in the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church, the diaconate didn't fall into disuse the way it did in the Western Church. What's the relationship between the Eastern Church and the Western Church when we're talking about the role of the deacon?
I might begin, the others might be more aware, but from my experience, there is a heavy sacramental emphasis on the deacons in the Eastern Church. I'm not sure how much they're conscious of their role to get out into the marketplace and represent the church in the marketplace.
More liturgical,
Yes.
liturgical presence.
But it was maintained as a distinct order, however, in the
Exactly.
Eastern Church, but it was more to carry out the liturgical functions.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I think seeing the role of an assistant to the bishop, so that an independent functioning in liturgical ministry, I think, in the Eastern Church you wouldn't see, as you would see it perhaps in the West.
Now, I know the Holy Father has been very, very desirous of achieving Christian unity, and he is always looking to the East. And as we've seen the restoration of the diaconate within the Western Church, has there been a mind to our relationship with the East as it's been restored? Or are we kind of going off on our own with this restoration?
Very definitely. Everything that's been accomplished in the Western Church, in the Latin Rite, has paralleled the Eastern rites right down the line. And the whole ecumenical dimension has really been played up through all of the discussions in the restoration.
So the restoration of the permanent diaconate might even serve an ecumenical role or function as well, in addition to the obvious ministerial role that it's playing within the Western Church.
In our formation program, we are forming Eastern Rite deacons along with the Latin Rite
you are?
deacons.
Uh-huh.
And so
This in New Orleans.
we have a great deal of commonality. We're working more and more in common with our restoration and with their diaconate. So we're coming more and more in community with that.
Well, good. Well, we'll explore these questions a little bit further when we return. We'll be back shortly.
The St. Charles Forum will continue in a moment.
Welcome back to the St. Charles Forum as we discuss the restoration of this beautiful ministry within the Church, the ministry of the permanent diaconate. Bishop Melczek, what would you say are the principal characteristics of the ministry of the permanent deacon?
In terms of function,
Yes.
again, it's the ministry of the Word, ministry of the altar, and ministry of service or ministry of charity and justice.
Okay, well, maybe we can just take those one at a time. I'll start with someone who spends a lot of time in the sanctuary. Now, the ministry of the Word, how does the deacon relate to that?
I think the deacon's ordained to proclaim the gospel and to preach the gospel.
So they are entitled to preach.
Indeed. And also to lead the assembly in the general intercessions. The deacon is the one who articulates the needs of the community. And
Why would he be in a particularly good position to do that?
Well, I think we've been talking about this ministry of charity, and if he is serving the needs of God's people, he certainly knows them, and knowing them would be the best one to articulate them in terms of intercession.
Okay, so it makes a lot of sense then for the deacon to be the
Indeed.
one offering up the intercessions to God the Father in the Eucharistic liturgy. Well, Jim, when you're in the sanctuary, you're not there in a coat and tie.
No, we're certainly invested in alb and stole and dalmatic for Eucharist. But when we extend that, when we look at those threefold ministries, they're interactive.
It's a little hard to talk about one without
the other. So they interplay. And so when we talk about the liturgical function, we have to look at the service ministry or ministry of charity, because that's where it begins. It begins there, then that's what comes into the sanctuary. You know, the sort of ritualizing what happens in the ministry of charity. So that's what's brought to the altar, and that's why the people are represented there and all of those hurts and needs and desires. And so that's why it's obvious that the deacon should be the person who would bring that forth.
And you've known them because you're living among these people, you're taking them the viaticum, you're
right, or any
Communion.
various on sundry. The average person doesn't see that. They just see us in the sanctuary and really don't see what's happening in these other ministries of charity, which are so very vital to the life of the church.
And you perhaps have discovered Mildred 2 doors down in an apartment building from the church that hadn't been ministered to in
Precisely
4 or 5 years, and you now bring her into the sanctuary in your prayers.
And even in the workplace, just tremendous work is being done out there in the world where there are hurts and needs, and particularly in today's society, where we can make ourselves available. The ministry of presence is so important to people. And when we can do that actually in the workplace, it really it brings the sacramental presence of the church right there into the work world.
And I think we should stress that we don't want to limit the deacon's ministry of the word to in the sanctuary.
Very good.
Right.
Yeah.
He is often involved in teaching those who come to desire acceptance into the Catholic Church, those who are catechumens or those who are candidates for baptism at some later point. He is often involved in instruction, marriage instruction, instructing those whose young children he may later baptize. He's involved perhaps in religious education classes. And then, we do so much teaching, I think, as Jim is alluding, through our example, as we do by word. So really, he teaches on a quite broad basis. And one other point, if I could get back to sacramental ministry, one of the reasons given at the Second Vatican Council for the restoration of the Permanent Diaconate is so that those who are doing diaconal ministries might do them with the power of the Holy Spirit.
Now, what do you mean when you say
orders.
those who are doing diaconal ministries? What do you actually mean by that?
There are many who teach religious ed, who instruct, who do works of charity, but deacons through ordination are empowered with the Spirit and given the sacramental character. So have special sacramental grace to accomplish the ministry entrusted to their
so
care.
they may have been involved in these service ministries for some time.
And often were.
But now they're actually receiving God's grace within this ordained ministry to do it all that more effectively.
Precisely, and I think sometimes we lose sight of that point.
Now, if we have the deacon in the sanctuary, and that's frankly, I think where the vast numbers of the people sitting out in the congregation see him and recognize him as such, he's leading in the intercessions. He's proclaiming the gospel. Now, why would the deacon be designated to proclaim the gospel rather than, let's say, the priest? Is there a significance to that?
Historically, that's been a role entrusted to the deacon. And in fact, in the ordination rite, the deacon is presented with the book of the Gospels and is told, receive the gospel of Christ, whose herald you are.
So here he is the proclaimer of the word, literally,
exactly,
in the gospel, and then he carries that into the marketplace.
Yes.
And he, what about the dismissal? At the end of Mass, the Mass is ended, go in peace. It's usually the deacon that, if the priest lets him, that because sometimes they blurt it out together. But why does the deacon give the dismissal at the end of Mass?
Well, that goes along with his role in the liturgy to give instructions to the community.
I see.
And so if anyone were to indicate to the community that a change of posture is in order or whatever, it would be the deacon who would do so, like at the Good Friday intercessions. Or
that's interesting. Tell us a little bit about that at the Good Friday intercessions.
Part of the liturgy for Good Friday are rather lengthy and solemn intercessions in behalf of all types of people. And
the deacon has an important role in that.
yes,
too.
before the priest, once the priest announces the intercession, and before the prayer is said, the deacon asks people to go to their knees for a moment of silent prayer, and then to rise before the priest says the prayer.
So the role of the deacon again in the assembly.
That's right. In addition to that, it's a deacon who invites the people to give the greeting of priest. Again, if
That's right.
if the priest doesn't forget.
That's right.
And of course the dismissal.
The instruction to the people
I see.
from which he's coming and serving. And
Why is the stole crossed? I see you have a lapel pin, and it looks like a crossed stole. The stole goes over the shoulder, right?
Still goes over from the left shoulder. It's symbolic of washing the feet, as we talked about earlier. The deacon's role of the servant, and it's the towel. It's the towel at the ready to wash the feet of the disciples of the people, as Jesus did. And it's just carry. If you went into a restaurant, and you saw a waiter, you're probably going to see a towel over his shoulder, ready to serve, and it's kind of symbolic of that the stole is worn in that position at the ready for ministry of service.
And of course, the stole is that colored band.
The colored band that is worn across the alb.
You mentioned the word dalmatic earlier. What's that?
Dalmatic is a sleeved garment, outer garment that's worn different from the priest's chasuble in that it has a definite tunic design with an actual sleeve, where the priest's chasuble is an oval flowing vestment, whereas the dalmatic is more of a tunic type vestment with an orphrey or color or banding on the outside, signifying the office of the deacon.
I think it's interesting to note, too, as Jim said, they have sleeves because basically they're doing the work in the sanctuary.
Right.
Oh,
With the chasuble, basically the priest or the bishop is the one who prays and offers the prayer to the Father, so that the deacon, who's the minister of service, has to have his hands free.
Oh, I see.
To be able to do what he needs. So even the way we're vested
And to show
says something
the
about
relationship to the bishop, in certain occasions, the bishop would wear a dalmatic under the chasuble. So he'd wear the dalmatic and then the chasuble,
how
showing the
interesting.
relationship of fullness of that order.
When might a bishop do that?
Typically at ordinations.
Oh, I see.
When a bishop would ordain, he'd wear the dalmatic underneath the chasuble, again, symbolizing his fullness of orders.
So when you become a bishop, it's not that you leave the diaconate and the priesthood behind.
No. We are always called to be servants. That role remains.
Well, what about, now we've talked about the ministry of the word, the liturgy. Now, what about the ministry of service, almsgiving, temporalities? I mean, one often thinks of deacons as concerned with money matters, to put it very bluntly. Is this a particularly distinct role for the deacon that he should be playing in the?
More so in the early church, the deacons are still involved with administration in some aspects, but it's more now, I guess now human resources would be described more concretely today, because it's animating and calling forth laity and in serving others and being available, being present to people in prisons and the marginalized of society. Those with special needs that the church needs to care for, as it's been traditionally the role of the deacon.
But there we see it very much in terms of service. But the church also has what we call temporalities, property, investments. Is it a proper role of the deacon to be involved in the administration of temporalities?
Historically, that has been the case, as Jim mentioned.
Yeah.
It's probably not so much the case today, at least in most dioceses, as it had been historically. It would not at all be inappropriate.
No.
But there's a beautiful story about St. Lawrence, right, where in a sense these two concerns of the deacon come together. Anybody want to tell us the story of St. Lawrence?
Of course, St. Lawrence, sold the wealth of the church and to care for the poor, for the kingdom actually. And then when he was called forth to show the treasures, he brought all these people in as witness, as the great gifts and treasures of the kingdom. And for that, he was barbecued.
So he was martyred. By being roasted alive.
But the great image there was that that's where the treasures really are.
The real treasures of the church are the
really
poor.
The church of the poor, and those if we image the suffering servant image of Christ, then we can see the deacon in that role that Lawrence so beautifully exhibited to us as a wonderful example of where our treasures really are.
In many ways, the deacon is called to help us keep our priorities straight. Mm-hmm. As Jesus would, to treasure those who are on the fringes of society, those who are marginalized, those who are the neediest in the community.
Those who have no voices, I suppose.
Exactly. The hungry, the homeless, the victims of AIDS, those who are abandoned in any way, those who have any kinds of handicaps, those who are victims of racism, the migrant workers and so on. He keeps them before us. In today's society, there's so much emphasis that our fulfillment comes from power, from possessions, from pleasure. And the deacon says, no, that's not where it's at. It's in the service to the neediest in our community.
Mm-hmm. What a beautiful witness that the deacon's able to make.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, you were saying earlier that you get involved in soup kitchens even.
We have deacons who are 6 nights a week. They're at we have a soup kitchen. It's more than that. It's a center for men who have needs. Wonderful ministry. Some of the things these guys do are just mind-boggling.
Well, I suspect that if you had a deacon who was in charge of the portfolio of the Archdiocese, you would also have him going periodically to the soup kitchen as well.
Very definitely, and the Archbishop has been very good with us. He was just with me this past weekend, dealing with a group, an apostolate that deals with the handicapped, and some very, very tough cases there.
Good. We'll come back and explore
like
some of these ministries further after we come back from this next break.
Stay tuned. The St. Charles Forum will return in just a moment.
Welcome back to the St. Charles Forum as we discuss the restoration of the Permanent Diaconate. Jim, you had some figures for us earlier. Do all the dioceses and archdioceses in the country now have a Permanent Diaconate program?
Was it 155 out of...
Precisely.
155.
155 dioceses out of 109 Latin and Eastern Rite dioceses.
Out of 190?
Out of 189.
Or 189.
So that's remarkable.
Yeah, almost all of them then.
That's right.
Are there many?
The better part.
Many permanent deacons at this point in the country?
Well, at last count, we had 11,175.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Which counts for 60% of the deacons in the world.
Oh, really?
So it's astounding.
Yeah. Well, why do we have so many in this country and the other countries don't have so many?
Well, probably the American bishops took a hold of this real quickly after the Restoration and went and
saw the
value of it and began working. It's interesting that when the Restoration occurred, the bishops applied for the permission to restore it. It was almost like in return mail. It was like 6 months later. It was up and running, and then 4 programs were involved, and it was going. Huh. And that's 25 years ago.
It'd be interesting to know that. We're increasing at about 5% a year. So at the turn of the century, we should have about as many deacons as we do diocesan priests in the country.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, it is.
Now, it's a heavy demand, isn't it? I mean, Father, you're involved in the formation program for the deacons for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. First of all, it's a demanding ministry, first of all, isn't it? And then a demanding formation program. And maybe you could address both those.
It is, and I think that's precisely why the whole admissions process is very, very key. I think to acknowledge the fact that this gentleman is a family man, generally, and someone who has full-time employment himself, and then to take on the added responsibility of pursuing diaconal formation. Part of the screening or the discernment process is to make sure discernment that those three things can come together in a way that benefits him and can deepen his own sense of service and his own spirituality.
And in some men, it doesn't, right? It just doesn't come together, and that's part of the discernment as to whether or not
and
he
that's
actually
part of
has
the
a
role of
vocation from
formation
God.
as well, you know.
I think that's something our audience should really, again, should call it to their attention, that the majority of deacons are not salaried by the church or stipend, but maintain the support of their own families and their own livelihood. And so they're really giving themselves to the church in a sort of a voluntary effort.
And this
so
is really it's seen as a vocation. In other words, men feel called by God to this ministry in the church.
And some are called. Some are literally called, where the pastor will say,
oh, really? I see.
Or the parish or parish leaders will
Christ comes calling through the pastor.
Will single out an individual because of their gifts and talents and service.
And we should probably make the point that while an individual may feel called, it's ultimately the bishop and those who assist him, like Father in the diaconate program, who make the final determination whether that individual does indeed have a vocation to ordained ministry in the church. I would want to make another point too, we've kind of touched on it, that we always insist, both for those in formation and for those who are ordained, that there's a matter of priorities here. It's always family first, and then the job, and finally the ministry.
Because after all, they had that vocation to family first, if they're married men.
That's right. And the church has always valued family so much. The families are the domestic church, and we would not want to do anything to put a wedge in that family.
Well, to carry on from that, though, but you can't separate those things out. In other words, you have those priorities that are set up, but when the deacon is the husband, he's also the deacon husband and the father husband. And so
she's the wife of a deacon.
There's been the concept that deacon is a part-time minister, which is again a contradiction in terms, because we can't divorce ourselves ever from orders. We can't take our deacon hat off and put on our father hat or our husband hat.
So watching the football game with your boys and drinking beer and eating your popcorn, you're a deacon.
You're still a deacon.
Okay.
And which is another great aspect of the ministry that's the example that families can give in a world, in a society so devoid of models of marriage and of parenthood and of husbands and that whole aspect of the example is so important.
As we've worked into this topic of family, I would think that the wife must have to have some kind of vocation also, and some kind of discernment process for the wife as well.
Well, we encourage the wives to be involved in the formation process because the man is growing in his spirituality and his understanding of the church, and we would certainly want to enhance their own relationship.
Sure.
So we would want her to be a part of that growth to the degree that she is able.
Now, does the wife have to give permission?
Exactly.
For her husband?
She does. And one of the signs of a vocation is the stability of the marriage, to start with. We touched on that. But also the wife's willingness for the husband to pursue this.
Yes.
And the code says not only, the code of canon law says not only a consent, but an informed consent.
She's got to know what she's getting into, right?
Yeah, it's important that some discernment or some formation has to take place so that the wife can make that informed consent to the ordination of her to-be deacon husband.
Yes, because it can be very demanding.
Exactly.
As we're saying.
We have some history behind us now. We've got 26 years here in our country. And we are currently surveying the deacons, the wives, the supervisors of deacons, and people like parish council members where deacons function. We ask the wives, from their point of view, has the relationship suffered because of their husband giving so much of his time as a deacon? And we've already tallied the results of the wives' survey, and we're very encouraged.
Oh, good. I was hoping you were going to share the results of the survey with us. You
yes,
can.
The wives have indicated that really their relationship has grown, that this has been a very positive thing for their marriage and for their family.
Oh, wonderful.
If there's any one thing, one of the questions was, if you were to advise a wife of a man interested in being a deacon, what would you say? The only condition, they said, is if you've got young children, it's probably better to wait a while because of the demands in terms of time. And that was really it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Father, you're administrator of the diaconate program in Philadelphia, but you're also a theologian, an educator. Can you tell us a little bit about the education that a permanent deacon receives compared to that which a priest receives, for example?
I can speak of our own program. I think there's basically a three-pronged program. The deacon needs to be well informed as to the theology and the tradition of the church. He needs to be pastorally molded to be able to communicate that knowledge in pastoral settings. And he needs to be rooted spiritually in the spirit of the gospel. So that if I were to say that if there were components to a formation program, I think you would find a theological component, a pastoral component, and certainly a component of spiritual and human development.
So they take theology courses?
They do.
And counseling courses?
They do, yes. In workshop settings.
History?
Yes.
Okay.
That's pretty
You
common
have to know what army you're marching with. John.
That's right.
That's pretty common practice in most formation programs. There is another dimension to formation too that we also consider important. That is the building of community. To build in within the formation period a community feeling, so that the deacons can work in community in the post-ordination years. And so those elements really come into play.
I have a lot more questions. I'm afraid we're going to run out of time, but this is so fascinating. But let's say a single man feels called to the permanent diaconate. He's a stockbroker, he wants to remain being that, or whatever, a teacher, and he becomes a deacon. A year later, he finds the woman of his dreams. Can he get married?
Not under the present church discipline. He has to take the vow of celibacy at ordination, and will remain.
So a permanent deacon, if he's single, takes a vow of celibacy at ordination.
Yes, and married deacons make a commitment not to remarry should the wife predecease him.
I see. So in other words, this is an important part of the informed consent. Before a man would go into the diaconate, he should know that if he loses his wife, he wouldn't be able to remarry.
Now, in some cases, they can apply for dispensation. Some are granted. They're very difficult to, the Holy Father himself grants those dispensations to remarry.
But they cease being a deacon then.
Oh, no.
no.
If the dispensation, if the impediment to remarry is lifted, then they can remarry and remain a deacon.
Okay,
in case of a widower.
The dispensations are not numerous, and I think they would tend to occur if the deacon still has young children to raise.
I see.
In some of those instances, the dispensation's been granted.
Can women be ordained to the permanent diaconate?
No, they can't. We hear of deaconesses in the early church, but to the best of our knowledge so far, scholars are still trying to pursue this whole matter. They did not participate in sacred orders.
It was a ministry of a service ministry of women, but not
Exactly.
in holy orders.
Right.
Do you think that ever might be restored? Some kind of service ministry of women?
Well, this
but
Holy
not-
Father is encouraging
holy
us
orders?
to do all we can to welcome women to exercise the broadest range of ministries apart from holy orders.
Okay. So clearly. But do you think there might ever be a special ministry called deaconesses that, which wouldn't be part of holy orders, that might actually go under that name? Or is there any talk of that at all?
Well, a number of bishops have asked the Congregation for the Clergy to study this matter more deeply to see what might be possible. We don't have any indications at this point that it would be a possibility.
Now, we only have a little bit of time left, but if a man wanted to become a deacon or thinks he would he go first to his parish priest?
That would be a good start. I think the parish priest would probably know him well and would have some sense of his spirituality, his motivations, what's prompting him, his relationships with people, his ability to get along with a wide range of people, and then might encourage him to go to talk to the director of the diaconate in the diocese.
Now, generally, would he go directly to the director of a program like this, or through the pastor?
Well, through the pastor or through some diocesan agency. You know, the director of an agency can certainly recommend someone. We always look at need, perception of need within the local church, and that's how we call men into formation, and so that's one of the criteria.
Well, we have little time left, about a minute. Is there any parting thought that you'd like to leave for our viewers?
I would say this, that we don't want to underestimate the importance of the deacon developing his spirituality. He is configured to Christ the servant, and so throughout his days as a deacon, whatever years he has, he must develop his relationship with Christ, as we all must. But it's a particular challenge that he has as one configured to Christ.
Well, Reverend gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. It was a fascinating program, and we can all thank God that His Spirit is still working among us and has restored this beautiful ministry to the life of the church. And let us all pray for our holy deacons and for their wives and families. Thank you for being with us.